You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. Between 2 and 6% of people have hoarding disorder, yet very few of us talk about it. Learn about the condition from me, somebody who has it, as well as academics, therapists, and other experts I interview. Find out how to support the podcast at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Finally, I am not a doctor, I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? I am okay. I am surrounded by damp laundry that won't dry because it's cold, but other than that, I'm fine. Today, I have for you a mini bit of housekeeping, and then I have a success of the week and a weird dilemma of the week. Then I am talking about some experiments we can all try. And then, finally, I have a shout out to a really thought-provoking thing I heard on another podcast.
Let's start with some housekeeping.
I have 2 bits of housekeeping today. One is that my copy of my calendar arrived in the post the other day. I am so happy with it. So in case you missed it, I have made a calendar for any of you to buy. It's print on demand, so there's not like a box full or a warehouse full. They are printed as you order them, so there's no waste. And it's a decluttering inspiration calendar with a different quote for every month in the year. And it's really pretty and colourful and shouldn't add to your clutter because it goes on the wall rather than in a pile on the floor. As you can tell, I speak with knowledge about where things end up. And mine arrived and I'm really, really happy with it. And I will be really happy to have that on my wall throughout 2025. And if you would like to get one, you can do at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/2025. That's the numbers 2025. And I will also see if I can take some pictures of mine and put them on my social media so you can see it in real life. The other bit of housekeeping is that the Dehoarding accountability Zoom sessions are still happening. There are 2 every month. And if you would like to come along and get a bit of dehoarding done in the company of other people who know exactly what you're going through, you can do. And you can get your ticket to come along at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/ticket.
It's time for the success of the week and the weird dilemma of the week.
So I haven't done a success of the week and a weird dilemma of the week for a while, so let me just quickly introduce what they are. I mean, they are kind of what they sound like. The success of the week is partly to give myself encouragement. I spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about what I find hard, and so I think it's quite good to balance that out with something that I've done well, but also to inspire you that if I can have successes, so can you. And the weird dilemma of the week is one of those things that I feel like people who do not hoard would just not understand, but it's something I have a big dilemma about and have either already made a decision on eventually or am still stuck on. So my success of the week is that it is almost December and I have not bought an advent calendar. I am not talking about the advent calendars of my childhood with either just a picture behind the window or a piece of chocolate behind the window. I am talking about the kind of advent calendars you can buy now with a beauty product every day of the month, or some stationery every day of the month, or some special coffee every day of the month. These are considerably more expensive than advent calendars with a piece of chocolate behind every window. But also, they are really difficult for hoarders to manage because if you're opening 21 bits of skincare stuff, say, there will inevitably be things in there that don't suit your skin or that you don't need or that you don't use. And it's exactly the kind of thing that we find very difficult to then get rid of when we've got. I have fallen for these kind of advent calendars before. There used to be a stationery shop called Paper Chase. Oh, Paper Chase is so missed. But I have in the past had a Paper Chase advent calendar where there was stationery behind every window, and some of it was joyful and some of it was, what on earth am I going to do with that? And this year I was very, very tempted by one that had a little pot of jam behind every window. It looks so pretty, and I like the idea of all the different flavours of jam for a month. And I resisted it because while it was very pretty and I do like that idea, I don't eat much jam. It would take me a year to get through 24 tiny pots. Plus, I can't remember exactly, but I remember it being more than £25 because I remember thinking, that's more than £1 for these tiny little pots that maybe have 2 teaspoons of jam in. It didn't make sense to me. And so I resisted, and I'm very glad I resisted. And I feel like this is a success. I have not fallen, because these things are heavily marketed. They advertise how much of a discount it is compared to if you bought these things individually. But the thing is, you wouldn't buy all of those things individually. You wouldn't buy 24 bits of makeup, only some of which suited your skin. You wouldn't buy every single thing in an advent calendar. So it's a false economy because you're still spending money on things you don't need or want that will then clutter up your home potentially for years to come. So that's my success of the week. I haven't bought one of the fancy advent calendars. I'm not ruling out buying a chocolate advent calendar, but I feel like that's a whole other thing. I think that's okay. My weird dilemma of the week. I, as you may remember, find it hard to resist the idea that if I just buy the perfect item of storage, my home would be fine. If I just get the right shelves, if I just get the right box, if I just get the right basket, everything will be fine. That's all I'm missing. And that is a lie, I tell myself. It is not the way to dehoard your home, to add more to it. And if you hoard, the issue is of volume, not of organising. And we need to reduce the volume before we know what we might need in terms of organising stuff. But just because I know that rationally doesn't mean I'm always great at applying that. And I had, sometimes things just become a fixture in your home and you just walk past them forever without ever paying attention to them. I had a small cardboard box that had something flat pack in it. And it had been there so long, unbuilt, that I had no idea what it actually was. So the other day, I thought, it's quite small, it's got to be fairly easy to build. I'm going to build this flat pack and then work out what it is, and then decide whether it's something useful or not. So I opened up the box and learnt that it was a slimline shaker unit, and that meant nothing to me. I know what slimline means. I roughly know what unit means. I didn't know what shaker meant, so I thought, right, I've just got to build this thing to find out what it is. And so I built it. It was pretty straightforward, and it's basically a wooden box with a lid, and it is slimline. And when I built it, I realised why I would have bought it, and that was for a very thin shelf in my bathroom. But I have something else on that slim shelf in my bathroom now that works really well. So knowing that I bought it for that and that I'm not going to use it for that, I was then like, well, what can I use it for? And I honestly don't know. It's something I would not buy now because I can't think of what I'd use it for. But I think the thing to do was not build it I think building it makes me feel like I've got some kind of attachment to it now. I brought it to life, and so I've got to keep it and use it. But it's been hanging around now for a few days, built, and it's very nice, it's fine. But I don't know what I would put in it or where I would keep it. I think saying this out loud, I'm realising this is something I just have to donate because it's not of use to me. But it's interesting, isn't it, that the fact of having built it makes me feel like, I'm sure there's a logical fallacy in there that I've talked about on the podcast before, but I can't think what it's called. But something about the power of having built it myself means that I feel more attached to it than I would if I just bought it or found it fully formed. This is me popping in to say I have found the logical fallacy in question. It is called the IKEA effect, and it is a cognitive bias in which consumers place a disproportionately high value on products they partially created. Okay, back to the pod. I think this is something, now I'm talking it through, that has to go on FreeCycle or Facebook Marketplace or something like that. Because it's nice, it's brand new, even if old, it's never been used. And somebody could probably get some good use out of it, and I can't. Okay, that wasn't as much of a dilemma as I thought it was. Although whether I actually go ahead and do that, we will see. So today I am talking about 10 experiments we can all try to help us to work out how we work best in terms of dealing with our stuff in our home. When I had CBT therapy, one of the things that was honestly quite life-changing was that when I was resistant to trying something because I was so convinced I would fail or I didn't know how it would go or anything like that, the therapist would frame it in terms of an experiment. It wasn't that I could pass or fail the task we agreed on between sessions. It was that it was an experiment from which we would learn. Either we would learn, oh, I can do that quite easily, or if I couldn't do it, we would learn from that and apply what we learnt to our next idea. And that sense of, this isn't a test I can pass or fail, this is an experiment where I can learn more about myself and learn more about what works for me, really took that perfectionist pressure off. I was able to try things because I wasn't immediately assessing whether I was or was not a failure. It was a thing I was trying. It was an experiment. I was able to go into it a bit more neutrally and say, let's see. If my goal is to take 3 bags out in a week, no, I'm doing an experiment to see if I can take 3 bags out in a week. It takes that pressure to get everything right off immediately. And the thing with experiments is there are no right or wrong answers. We're all different. I'm going to talk through 10 potential experiments we can all do. And we might all get completely different results, and that's fine, because we're completely different humans with completely different brains. But when we do these experiments and learn more about ourselves and what makes us tick and what helps us to achieve things and what makes us sit in a pile and be absolutely paralyzed and unable to take any action at all, the more we learn about those things, the more we can move forward with better knowledge of ourselves and better hope of being able to make progress. So I have come up with 10 different experiments we can all do. And we don't have to do all 10. We don't have to do all 10 this week. Maybe try one this week, one the next week, one the week after. But as I talk through each one, think about, first of all, what your instincts say. What do your instincts tell you would be most suited to you as a person? And then think, how am I going to test this? What can I do this week to see which of these different options suits me better as an experiment, not as something I can pass or fail, not as something I can mess up just as something I can try and observe and learn from. So the first one, a lot of us find it useful to set time slots for our tidying, dehoarding, cleaning, that kind of thing. It might be that you say, if I do this for 20 minutes, I can take a 5-minute break. It might be that you say, I'm going to get 3 hours done today. It might be any permutation of anything to do with time slots. But the first experiment is what time slots work best for you. For some people, it's 10 minutes at a time, and after every 10 minutes there's a 5-minute break, and then they're powered back in for another 10-minute slot, and they find that having relatively short slots really focuses their mind as they get things done. Other people are the kind of people who are like, I need 3 solid hours, maybe with breaks, but I need a 3-hour time slot. Otherwise, it feels pointless to even try. Otherwise, I can't really get elbow deep into this stuff, and I'm always waiting for it to end. Whereas if I have 3 or 4 hours ahead of me, I feel like I can get a lot done. And obviously, there are a lot of time slots between 10 minutes and 3 or 4 hours. So maybe try one day 10-minute time slots, one day 25-minute time slots, one day 45-minute time slots, and try things out. See, first of all, what your gut tells you would work best in, and then see what actually happens when you do it. Sometimes your gut will have been correct, your instincts will have been correct, and actually 20 minutes is perfect for you, which is what you imagined. Sometimes we surprise ourselves, and what our instincts told us would be most effective actually isn't. So that's experiment number 1. What time slots work best for you? The second experiment to play around with is, do you find it more effective to start your day with some dehoarding first thing in the morning? Or do you find it more effective to build up to it through the day and do it later on in the day when you've mentally prepared yourself? I did an episode, you might want to re-listen to episode 157, about the benefits and drawbacks of swallowing the frog, which is doing it first thing, or saving the worst till the last, building up to the task you're dreading the most. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, the reason it's called swallowing the frog, I know that sounds horrible, is because it is horrible. It's this idea that if you swallow a live frog first thing in the morning, then you've automatically got the worst possible thing that could happen that day done, and you can relax for the rest of the day. So some people prefer to wake up, have a glass of water, have some breakfast, and get straight into their dehoarding. They want to get it out of the way so they can relax for the rest of the day and get on with what they need to do. Other people would just never get out of bed if that was the first thing they had to do, and instead they have to get everything else done while they mentally prepare and build up to doing a task they're dreading later on in the day. This one is something you can test relatively easily by planning 2 days of each and seeing which is most effective. And the thing with pretty much all of these experiments that I'm talking about is it's worth re-experimenting after a period of time, because we change. What works for us changes, what's effective for us changes, what we can tolerate changes. And so what might be perfect for me now might be different to what's perfect for me in 6 months' time or in 2 years' time. So these experiments are worth repeating, but don't overthink that for now. Just think about doing them for now. The third experiment, do I work better when I set giant long-term goals or smaller short-term ones? I learned early on in this process that while it is nice and helpful to have a big goal of having the kind of home that I can invite friends over to, that isn't the goal that motivates me on a day-to-day basis. It feels too far away, it feels too hard, it feels too difficult, it feels too abstract. So for me, A mixture of short-term and medium-term goals works the best. So what that looks like for me is I will say, I really want to be able to get to that bookcase over there. That's my medium-term goal. Be able to use that bookcase. And then my short-term goals are all the steps I need to take to be able to use that bookcase effectively. That may look very different for you, but you're not going to know unless you try. So for this experiment, try all the different permutations. Giant long-term goal as your motivation for a week. Tiny short-term goals as your motivation for the next week. Medium-term goals for the third week. And see if there's a way you can measure your progress in terms of the progress in your home, but also how you feel about it. Because when we know what makes us tick, when we know what works, it is such a powerful tool to help us do more tomorrow and do more the day after, do more the day after that. And when you're dehoarding an entire home, there needs to be some level of consistency like that. We can't just rely on fits and starts. We need to know what works on an ongoing basis. The fourth experiment to try is, do I get more done if, and there are 3 options here. Do I get more done if A, I have a detailed to-do list, B, I have a vague to-do list, or C, I have no to-do list at all? So a detailed to-do list might look like sort out the magazines on top of the cabinet, sort out the clothes in front of the cabinet, sort out the top drawer of the cabinet, sort out the medium drawer of the cabinet, sort out the bottom drawer of the cabinet, that kind of thing. A vague to-do list might be sort the area around the cabinet. I don't generally advocate to-do lists that look like sort out the bedroom, because unless there's very little left to do in the bedroom, that's too big and too vague and very hard to achieve. So you never get to tick that thing off the to-do list and get the sweet, sweet dopamine hit that you get when you tick something off. So even when I talk about vague to-do lists, it's not that vague, like dehoard the house. It's things like dehoard half the front room or clear off the kitchen cabinets, something like that. Or are you a no to-do list at all person? Do you want to do it on instinct? Do you want to rely on your memory? Do you want to do just whatever you fancy on any given day? As with all of these, there is no right answer. There is no answer that I'm pointing you towards. I'm not hinting that one is better than the other. I promise I'm not. You can test this out by spending a couple of days with a detailed to-do list, a couple of days with a vague to-do list, and a couple of days with no to-do list. And maybe at the end of each day, just make a note of how much you got done, how you felt doing it. And then at the end of the process, see which was the most effective for you. Experiment number 5 is asking yourself, do you react well to challenges? So, for instance, there are challenges like, I've seen things like, for 30 days, you do a thing where on day 1, you remove 1 item from your home. On day 2, you remove 2 items from your home. On day 3, you remove 3 items from your home, and so on until on the 30th day, you remove 30 items from your home. I can see that those can be really effective. Some people find them too pressuring. They find them too pass or fail, and that bugs their perfectionist. Other people find it a really good focus to have and something that focuses their mind as well as their activities. So it's easy to Google decluttering challenges. There are plenty of them. Maybe try one and see, do you react well to this? Does it power you on? Or do you find yourself shutting down at the fear of failing or at it being too pressurizing? Dehoarding darlings are podcast listeners who get access to extra from me. I write a bonus post every month with a bit of an update from me, additional links, answers to extra questions from guests, some recommendations, and a dehoarding playlist. You can become a dehoarding darling and help to support the podcast, as well as getting this bonus monthly post at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. Experiment number 6. Do I do better when I declutter by room, for example, the bedroom or the kitchen, or by type of item, for example, clothes, books? Basically, is it easier to focus on specific spaces or particular types of items? Some people like to go around their entire house and get every item of clothing that's not where it's meant to be and sort all their clothing in one go. Other people need a particular area of their home that they're focusing on, no matter what the items in that area are. This is something you can test by trying both. And you can even combine both. You can say, okay, I'm going to focus on the kitchen. I'm going to declutter in my kitchen. And first of all, I'm going to find all the cutlery and sort that out. And secondly, I'm going to find all the mugs and sort them out. And thirdly, I'm going to find all the crockery and sort that out. So I guess there are 3 options with this experiment. 1 is decluttering by space. 2 is decluttering by type of item. And 3 is decluttering by space, but using the type of items as a way to focus within that room. Number 7, and this is similar to the swallowing the frog or saving the worst till the last. Do I want to tackle sentimental items to clear emotional hurdles early in the process? Or do I want to save them for later in the process when I'm more practiced at dehoarding? The reason I went for sentimental items here is because for me, that's probably the hardest category. But think for you what the hardest category is. Do you prefer to tackle the hardest category up front or after building confidence? I know for me, often if I'm dealing with a pile of a whole mixture of stuff and I come across something sentimental, I immediately put it to one side and think I will deal with sentimental later. It will slow me down at this point when I need to get more done. And by the time I've only got sentimental items left, I will have had literal years of dehoarding practice. That muscle will be so well toned that it will help me to make better decisions on the sentimental stuff. I am aware that a drawback of that is that I risk getting to a point where there are no easy wins. I get to a point where I've done all the easy wins and all I've got left is the incredibly hard stuff. I'm aware I may be setting myself up for a hurdle at that point. But for me, if I was tackling a pile of generic mess and came across a letter from somebody who had died, if I tried to make a decision about that there and then, it would completely distract me from everything else and I would get very little else done. And so I choose to save those for later when I'm more practiced. That's not to say it's the perfect solution. It's to say that for me, at a point where I still have a lot of volume to deal with, it feels like the only realistic option. You may feel completely differently about whatever it is you find hardest. But the way to work this out is to try both options. Think, first of all, what is your hardest category? It might be clothes. It might be books. It might be stuff from your childhood. It might be stuff from somebody who's died. Think about ways you can test. How does that go if you deal with those up front? And how does it go if you say, I will deal with those when I've built up the strength? Experiment number 8. So I talked about the importance of dehoarding consistently rather than just in fits and starts. But that also will look different for different people. For some people, 20 minutes a day is the way they do that. For other people, an hour a day. But for other people, it's a few hours a week, but not necessarily daily. It's about the consistent action rather than specifically what that consistent action looks like. So the 8th experiment is, do I do better when I spend 20 minutes dehoarding every day? Or do I do better when I set aside a few hours a week for a focused effort? Maybe you've only ever got time on Sundays because that's the day your kids are with their other parent, or that's the only day you're not at work. And so for you, it's just a lot more realistic to do 4 hours every Sunday afternoon and not much else during the week. For other people, if they get into a routine of doing 20 minutes before they go to bed, or doing half an hour on their lunch break, or doing an hour when they get in from work on a daily basis, that works better to keep that momentum going. So part of that is about, do you do better when you incorporate decluttering into your routine, or when you dedicate specific times to it? When you're cooking a meal, can you incorporate sorting and dehoarding while the pasta's boiling or while the veg is roasting? So this is something to try for experiment number 8. One is kind of 20 minutes a day, trying to build that into your routine. The other is a few hours in one go, once a week or twice a week, where you're really focused. Try both. Try different permutations of both. Try 40 minutes every other day. Try an hour every other day. Try different setups to see which you enjoy or which you resent the least, to see which feels less of an imposition, to see which feels more like it fits into your life and into your thinking style, into the way your brain works, into your energy levels. Experiment number 9 is, do I do better when I set a strict time frame for dehoarding? For example, I do an hour at a time, full stop. Or do I do better when I allow myself to work without time constraints? Are you the kind of person who thrives under structured deadlines? Or do you prefer the freedom to take your time and do it as you feel, rather than because you planned it? For me, I do both. I have to have some structured dehoarding time in my week, because if I rely on being in the mood and being motivated, weeks and weeks and weeks might pass with me doing nothing. So I have to have some structured time frames and goals that I achieve every day or every week. However, I do know that there are times when I have a wave of motivation, a wave of feeling inspired, and I also allow myself to embrace those when they happen. I don't suppress those because I have a structured plan. I embrace those and follow that wave as it comes, but I don't rely on that wave of unstructured motivation to carry me through, because it's not reliable. It shows up as and when it feels like it. And so that's how I've learnt to kind of make it work for me. When the urge comes, I follow it. When I want to do nothing but sort things out, that's what I do. But when that's not the case, I still have daily and weekly goals that keep that consistency. So experiment with both of those. Structured timeframes versus doing it when you get the urge, and see what works for you. And the final experiment we can all try. Do I find it easier to get started on dehoarding if I'm listening to music, if I'm watching TV, if there's no noise at all, if I'm chatting to a friend, maybe on the phone, or if I'm listening to a podcast? or an audiobook? Which of those gets you going? Which will take you from inaction to action? A lot of listeners say they listen to this podcast while dehoarding. Some use it as a reward. They won't let themselves listen to the podcast if they're not dehoarding. So if they want to listen to the next episode, they have to do some dehoarding in order to do that. Whatever works. I find that when I'm dehoarding, generally music is what does it for me. Upbeat music. I have playlists specifically for this. In fact, Dehoarding Darlings, who are listeners who sign up to get a little bit extra from me every month, also get a Spotify playlist that I've put together that helps me when I'm needing to get myself started, because it's upbeat, it gets you wanting to dance. Some people want the TV on so they're not having to be too focused on what they're doing and they can just get on. Other people can't be doing with noise. Some people need to be chatting to someone in person, on the phone, on Zoom, as they dehoard. Some of the people who attend the Dehoarding Accountability Zoom sessions say that they generally find it really hard to get started. But when they're in the Zoom session, because they know others are doing the same at the same time, that helps them to take action as well. So there's all these different options for how to get yourself from inaction to action and what might help. And so the things to test: how do I get on if I'm listening to music? How do I get on if I'm watching TV? How do I get on if there's silence? How do I get on if I'm chatting to a friend? How do I get on if I'm listening to a podcast? Those are things, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options there. You could try them over the next 5 days. Today, try music. Tomorrow, TV, and see which switches your brain into the mindset you need it to be in to get some dehoarding done. I mentioned a couple of things there, the Dehoarding Darlings and the Accountability Zoom sessions. You can find the links, if you want to know more, to those on overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/links. So those are 10 experiments we can all try to see what helps us. That's the goal, is to make this less onerous, to make this less torturous. What helps us to actually get this thing done, or to get any of it done? It's generally too overwhelming to think about the entire thing. But the next bit you want to get done, which of these options makes that easier and which feels like it slows you down? And even if we imagine one is the answer, we may surprise ourselves and find that through experimenting, actually it's really different to what we'd have expected. Other times it's exactly what we'd have thought it would be, but we're not going to know unless we try. So a quick recap of those 10. 1, what time slots work best for you? 2, dehoarding first thing in the morning or build up to it through the day? 3, do I work better when I set giant long-term goals or smaller short-term ones? 4, do I get more done if I have a detailed to-do list, a vague to-do list, or no to-do list at all? 5, do I react well to challenges? 6, do I do better when I declutter by room or by type of item? 7, do I want to tackle the hardest items first to clear emotional hurdles early, or save them for last when I'm more practiced? 8, do I do better when I spend 20 minutes daily decluttering, or when I spend a few hours a week on a more focused effort? 9, do I do better when I set a strict time frame for dehoarding, or when I allow myself to work without time constraints? And 10, do I find it easier to get started if I'm listening to music, watching TV, no news at all, chatting to a friend, or listening to a podcast? I'd be fascinated to hear how you get on. You can always contact me on social media or on info@overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk.
It's the bit where that hoarder shouts out someone wise.
So shout out this week to a podcast called Knowledge Fight, which I will link to in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. And shout out in particular to their guest, Robbie Parker, who lost his daughter in the Sandy Hook shooting. And in this little clip, he's talking about how something that helped us at one time in our life might end up being not just not helpful, but actively negative for ourselves and others as we change and grow. Have a listen.
So in my life, right? So my coping strategies that I developed as a kid, right? The things that I used to try and create safety in my life and to overcome horrific things, you develop these patterns of behaviors, right, for your own survival. And then you go through life applying that to every situation in your 30s, and they don't work anymore. And those things actually hurt people. So part of my healing journey is me learning the ways that I coped and the way that the behaviors that I incurred and the lies that I told to people that I love and the hurt that caused them. Mm-hmm. And me having to learn how to take that accountability and repay that debt. I can look back and say, yes, I had these things happen. And this was an attachment behavior response or a trauma response. And those are true, but I'm still responsible for it. And I didn't get to pick how it affected people. And there's people that I care deeply about that I've hurt very, very much. And it's impacted a lot of my relationships.
I thought that was incredibly powerful. And also a very generous way to look at things, given the utter tragedy he went through. It's worth asking ourselves, what are we doing now that served us at one point but is now toxic? Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast. And 10, do I get stuck? And 10, do I find it? And 10, do I find it easier?